Hi, this is Dawn Richardson for a Soul Streams audio on diversion and aversion, perversion and subversion, the ego's escapades of escape. So I've been thinking a little bit about, again, I wrote a little bit about this in Journey to the Heartland, but I'm thinking again about these words, diversion, aversion, perversion, subversion, and in terms of the ego and the soul and what we experience here in this reality, as our human personality often goes to great lengths and participates in escapades in order to essentially escape the call of the soul or escape the radiant realization of who we are because we are afraid of it. And so we go to great lengths to create an alternate version of reality. Interesting if you think about this whole world we live in that is enamored, quite enamored with alternate realities. And so I want to talk a little bit about diversion, aversion, perversion, and subversion. And let me go back to that subtitle, though. The subtitle of this audio is The Ego's Escapades of Escape. And I want to point out the commonalities between escapades and escape. And think a minute about this idea of escape. So escapade is and escape, they share a root. Both of those words are derived from the Latin verb escapare, which means to escape, and it comes from ex, which means out of course, and kappa, meaning head covering or cloak. Okay, so if you think about what that means, it means to come out of the head covering or cloak. Now, what's really interesting about this whole concept here, so the ego's escapades of escape, escapades, you think of these really heightened, like over exaggerated acts, which is exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens during the human journey. There is at some point a realization that there's something more than this human construct and this personality that we show up with at play here. And so when that comes into our awareness, most of us don't immediately surrender to it and say, yes, okay, great, I'll go with the soul. Some of us are fortunate in that we do remember something of that, and so we are more true perhaps to it. But still, we all go through this battle of the will or ego over and against soul, and we want to cover it up. So literally, we want to cloak the soul in ego, or the soul becomes cloaked in ego as a part of this reality. And so there's this uncloaking, and yet at the same time, our escapades, it's almost like it's so funny, it's humorous to me if you really step back and look at it, because there is no way to keep the soul cloaked. It will ultimately reveal itself, because that is the beauty of the radiant soul, is that it wants to it's one with life. And so that's the other part of this, that as we are participating in all these diversions, aversions, perversions, and subversions, we are essentially denying life. And for me, life is what it's all about. Life is an acronym, if you're new to listening to me, that I use for living in full expression. I have a signature journey called 90 Days to Life, and the core underlying premise of that journey, and much of what I talk about, is that we are here to have life and to have it to the full, as Jesus taught. And so when we think about living in full expression, well, in order to do that authentically, it must come from the soul, and the radiant expansion must begin within, and it must come from a true place. Because if it comes purely from our ego desires, then it will be it will be like a very tall tower that is not rooted or not grounded, and so it will come tumbling down. So, the ego's escapades of escape, what does that look like? How is it that we create our own versions of reality and that we are increasingly grasping at straws in order to deny life, to deny our soul's truth and radiance, our star power? And why do we do that? But let's leave that question aside for a moment. I will address that in a different audio. I want to talk about diversion, aversion, perversion, subversion. So let's start with diversion. Diversion. So the meaning of diversion is an instance of turning something aside from its course, or an activity that diverts the mind from tedious or serious concerns, a recreation or pastime. So diversion, it is essentially turning our eyes away from what is true, and in a way that it is turning something aside from its course, from its true course, your life's course. My very first, when I began, I really fully embraced my awakening process, and I was doing a version of spiritual business life coaching, my own little version, and I called it life course coaching. And it was about that your life's course is coming from the heart and soul of who you are. It's an inside out journey that we are on, because the only way you can bring something to life is from the inside out, because all else will die or fall away. It's not sustainable. You are a dynamic and sustainable system, and your soul, your solar systems within you, your star power is where everything begins. So when we engage in diversions, we are simply turning our eyes away from what is most true. We are turning something aside from its course. We are essentially saying, I'm in charge here, not you, soul. I, the ego, am in charge, and I want to do this. It's a very, I'm gonna, and it's very, in some ways frivolous, often, the way this plays out, but with very serious consequences. So how is it that you may be engaging in diversions? This often looks like, it can look like some serious drama in terms of, like karma playing out and other sorts of, crazy relationship and things at your workplace, or in your marriage, or your relationship, or it could be also with your family of origin. It can look like drama. It can also seriously look like frivolity. And you think of that second definition: an activity that diverts the mind from tedious or serious concerns, a recreation or pastime. So there are cases where our ego convinces us that we, like to do X, Y, Z, whatever thing it may be. And there is no one thing that I think that any given activity could be a diversion, and it could also be a call of the soul, to include very, 3D things like, and pastimes like a sport, for example, or video games, or a particular hobby, or a habit. I think that each of us individually has to answer that question: is this a diversion, or is this an expression, a true expression of my authentic soul self? So diversions are one of the ways that the ego attempts its escape from the call of the soul and from the true reality of who we are. So diversions, think about that a little bit. Let's talk about aversion. So aversion means a strong dislike or disinclination, such as he had a deep-seated aversion to most forms of exercise. Some synonyms of aversion are dislike, antipathy, distaste, abhorrence, hatred, odium, loathing, detestation, hostility. So it's typically used in reference to someone or something that arouses strong feelings of dislike. So aversion, when our ego decides it doesn't like something, it will have an aversion to that thing. Now, this I have seen and experience in my own life as really playing out and being directed at a certain external something or someone, like an activity or a person or a place or a thing. And yet, ultimately, our externalization of that aversion is merely, again, an attempt to escape from the soul's deep knowing that all is one and that we are well and that we are here for a purpose. And that purpose is to shine with radiance, with our own fine gifts of original design. And so often when we are experiencing aversion, notice that, that we are simply not aligned with our own soul's truth and knowing, and our own soul's truth and radiance, our star power. When we are not aligned with that, then we are likely to, again, be looking externally and be into a very judgmental way of interacting and engaging with the world. And that usually results in a lot of dislike, distaste, hatred, loathing, aversion. It's simply aversion. It's a version. It's not the one. It's not the real. It's not the truth. It's not who you really are. So we talked about diversion, turning something aside from the true course, and aversion, which is strong dislike or disinclination. Let's talk about perversion. Perversion, it comes from the Latin pervitare, and it is the alteration of something from its original course, meaning, or state, to a distortion or corruption of what was first intended. So synonyms: distortion, misrepresentation, falsification, travesty, misinterpretation, misconstruction, twisting, corruption, subversion, misuse, misapplication, debasement. So example of use would be a twisted perversion of the truth. And so distortion is the word that really rings true for me, but there are all of those very interesting variances of perversions. Perversion. Okay, let's think about that. Also, it can reference deviant sexual behavior, or what's considered deviant, or abnormal, unacceptable. And so perversion, alteration of something from its original course. So we talked about diversion being turning something aside from its course. Perversion is a more active interference. It is a literal manipulation that leads to a distortion of truth, of what was first intended. I wrote about this a little bit in my Journey to the Heartland. It's in the chapter that is called Screaming Eagles. I believe that's the title of the chapter. And let me give you a little context. So I was on my month-long journey through the Heartland, called from a dream that told me to go to the center of the United States. And so off I went on my 1 month journey, and it really was a journey of my soul. It was a part of my deeper soul level healing, and also there was another purpose for that journey. So in writing about this, so I just, in this chapter when I'm writing, I just spent 4 or 5 days up in a cabin on the North Shore in Wisconsin, and there was a lone wolf howling. It was very few people were there that time of the year, and it was early in the season before the crowds came, and there was a lone wolf howling, and I painted my one of the paintings that's probably most precious to me. It's a picture. I'll try to use it as the cover for this audio, but it's a picture of a wolf howling in the woods and a woman walking behind that wolf, and there's the idea of her speaking her truth. But when I painted that, inspired by the wolf's howling, there was a real sense that I had to fully honor the wolf. I had to fully hear the howling within me and outside and around me. I had to honor that and walk the path of my soul. So, in this chapter, I'm writing about screaming eagles and the free fall into love and what is true and defining that for yourself. And so, let me just read you a short excerpt from that chapter. Perhaps our own knowing that the truth remains alive within us and our terror at what this might mean is the true source of our endless inventions of distraction and substitutes. We have forgotten how to tell the truth about ourselves. I come now upon a dead gray wolf and see too that the howling is not easily squelched by starting fires. Yet, when we fail to heed the cry of the wolf and honor its insistent thirst for life, we slip easily into a world of our own making, turning one thing into another in what will merely be another failed attempt to tame the wildness of our souls. We create perversions, meaning false versions, that are the corruption or alteration of what is true and on course, in order to hide the light of love that scares us. The Latin pervertere literally means turn around. We cannot stand to see the truth we know we have to have survived. We are taught to fear our light and become more comfortable with darkness or the shades of gray so loved by modern society. So I really think that what happens for so many of us is we fall into this creation of a false reality. And then we, maybe unwittingly at first, but ultimately we become the builders of, the creators of a corruption, a perversion, something that is a manipulated, constructed reality that is not true, that alters us from our true course. It is a distortion. And we buy into it and we believe it to be real. And essentially that is what our entire 3D reality is, and in terms of us colluding to create this perversion of the true state of and our true nature. So distortion. How are we distorting our life, our reality, in an attempt to escape what is most true, the call of our wild soul? How are we not honoring the howling wolf within us? And how might we just stop and listen to the cries of the screaming eagle and the howling wolf, and stop these escapades of distortion and manipulation and misrepresentation and falsification and misinterpretation and misconstruction? Notice all the miss. It's complete attempt to delude ourselves. It's beyond distraction. Diversion was a distraction. Perversion is a manipulation. It's intentional. And many of us fall into this way of being. And it becomes where however it plays out in whatever area of your life, it can look like, workaholic, or it could look like sexual deviancy, or it could look like even lying to ourselves about who we are. It's a falsification. It's a misuse. It's a dishonoring of the whole of who we are. It's a debasement, a reduction, a contracted state, not an expanded state. And it is a tampering with something that is precious and pure. And we are deserving of so much more. This is not it's not about shaming ourselves for having participated in these perversions, because ultimately the perversions lead us back to the true version, the wholeness of who we are. So it's about seeing that and knowing and accepting and honoring and loving the whole of who we are, who we've been, but returning to the true original course, dropping the distortion, dropping the disillusion that we ourselves have created or co-created, And there's a saying that, well, let me just put it this way. I believe it's all a play of light. It's all beautiful. It's all a play of light. And in our attempts to pervert reality, to alter our course, to be in charge, to practice control and manipulation of our own reality or someone else's, and to believe, to have the audacity to believe that we are, in fact, in charge, not God, not our souls, that it's all a play of light. And when we are able to see that and then be the truth of who we are, which is light, which is life, which is love, then and there we return to our true source, to our original course, and we drop all distortions and we allow what is to be, and we embrace a whole new way of seeing ourselves, a whole new way of being ourselves, a whole new way of freeing ourselves from this sort of behavior that becomes ingrained over time. So much so, I have seen people and met people, and perhaps I have been caught in this at periods of my life as well, where you don't even realize that you are participating in the active perversion of life in its purity. So the last word I want to discuss in terms of the escapades of escape of the ego is subversion. Subversion, meaning the undermining of the power and authority of an established system or institution, such as the subversion of democracy. What I'd like to suggest here is that it doesn't have to be a system or an institution that's external. It can also be your soul, the power and authority of God. And our subversiveness leads us to actions and activities and even thoughts and feelings and beliefs that are subversive, that are disruptive, that do not honor life, that do not acknowledge the source and wellspring of our very being, of our life. And that sort of subversive activity can look it can come dressed in a lot of colors. It can look a lot of different ways. On one end of the spectrum, it can look like evil, playing out, being externalized in the world, corruption. It can also be dressed up as all lightness and love and goodness, but it's when you look a little closer, you see that is an illusion being projected, and that it is a subversion of God, of true authority, of life itself, of love in its purest form, of the whole of who we are. It is a denial of the soul, again, ultimately. And so subversion, those of us who have at times, at points along our journey, participated in subversive activities, we may be surprised to see that it's not just the plotting of the person who wants to blow things up and be subversive in that way, in terms of a lack of respect for authority in external systems, such as government, for example, or religion. But it also, or any societal institution, but it also can show up as a very subtle, energetic stream that is running, and it's a repatterning that, again, it can be almost imperceptible to us. It's a tricky way that the ego engages in these escapades of escape, because what is being subjugated, what the version is the truth. Also, I believe that VER, it comes from the root of truth, veracity. So we are subjugating truth And this can look a lot of, again, it can be very subtle the way this plays out, our own participation in subversion. So I hope this just gives you some food for thought in terms of the ways, the trickiness of, and the sophistication really of our human attempts to avoid the truth of who we are, our whole self and our soul self, to through diversion and aversion and perversion and subversion, to turn our eyes from the truth of who we are and why we are here and what life is truly about, and to return to life in its fullness and to receive the gift of life, because ultimately all of this is about denying the gift of life. Where it stems from, that's, I don't know, there's probably a lot of psychology there, and deep soul level corruptions that have occurred through many cycles of time. But in any case, whatever the reason, and it stems from, terror about the truth. And so therefore we seek to reject that in any means possible. And it can look quite funny if you look at the lengths to which we go to sometimes in our little ego escapades to escape what is most beautiful and that which we are most deserving of, which is life. Life to the full, life, living in full expression, life, and the life more abundant. That is why we are here. So just consider the ways in your life that you may have been engaging in diversion tactics, in averting the truth, turning your eyes away from it, in perversion, control, manipulation, otherwise, false, creating a false reality or misrepresenting the truth or yourself, and then subversion. So diversion, aversion, perversion, subversion. I hope this has been helpful. May write about this at some point. Would be interested in your comments, questions, thoughts. Lots of love. You can find more about me at dawnricherson.com. That's DAWNRICHERSON.com. My signature journey is called 90 Days to Life. 90 days and 90 ways to come fully to your life and live in full expression. It's all about growing your soul and then expanding radiantly in life and life's work. Much love to each of you. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.